I've never lived in one country. So I was born in Korea. Very shortly after, maybe like 6 months after I was born, I moved to Davis because my dad was studying his grad studies in UC Davis.
Okay.
So I was there for like about 2 years, maybe like 4 more years here. And then we moved to Virginia this time. It was Fairfax. 6 years of elementary school, just in a regular Korean school. And then after that, I did my secondary school in the UK and then came back to Korea. This time I went to a international high school. And then I went to college in Illinois, University of Illinois, and and then the story continues on, as I mentioned earlier.
My YouTube feed was feeding me different videos from like creators in South Korea, and I think it was your fitness app that had popped up onto my feed initially. This was like 2 or 3 months ago before I had even moved here. And so we had the opportunity to share a conversation a couple weeks ago because I reached out as a result of me seeing that video, which I was really impressed by. And obviously I was curious to get connected to as many people building in the South Korea startup ecosystem and just like Solopreneur kind of community. So could you just give yourself maybe a brief background of who you are and what you do right now, and then I'll ask you maybe some questions around your background, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to share our experiences today. I'm Lucas, and I've been in Korea for about 6 years now. I've worked as a product manager before I quit to do full-time solopreneuring. Right now, I run a small design agency, and on the side, I make apps that help people boost their productivity.
And you have been doing that, is it since graduating from undergrad? Or like how long have you been working on apps and building?
So straight after college, I had to serve in the military, which is the reason why I came back to Korea. And after I finished serving, I got a job as a product manager at a startup and worked for 2.5 years. And then I realized that I wanted to pursue my own ideas. So that led me to quit my job, to pick up. So I didn't know how to code back then when I quit. So the first thing I did was to learn how to program. And then it naturally led to me making apps on my own.
And my hope for this conversation and for other conversations that I have with cool people in Seoul is to like use these conversations potentially for my own personal podcasting use. There's a lot of people that I have built relationships with over the past couple of years that have been following along with my learning journey. And so for them to see some cool people that I'm meeting and to be able to share that with them is really special.
Amazing.
But then also the idea that I had pitched to you, which is basically both an in-person dynamic and hopefully a digital ecosystem where people from the Korean diaspora or people that are just passionate about Korea and its future can kind of come together, collaborate, meet each other is something that I'm very excited about, and you have provided some cool feedback on.
Right.
So in terms of your upbringing as well and your relationship to this country, can you share a little bit of background there?
Yeah, I feel like to preface my story, I feel like I'm like the perfect example of a Korean diaspora because I've never lived in one country, particularly for like the majority of my life. So it's been dispersed all over the place. So I was born in Korea, and very shortly after, maybe like 6 months after I was born, I moved to Davis because my dad was studying his grad studies in UC Davis.
Okay.
And so I was there for like about 2 years. And I came back to Korea when his studies was finalized, spent maybe like 4 more years here, and then we moved to Virginia this time. It was Fairfax, lots of Korean population there. And then spent just about like a year there, and then came back to Korea again, did my full 6 years of elementary school just in a regular Korean school, which is why I think I relate and associate with the Korean culture so much. And then after that, I did my secondary school in the UK, spent 3 years there, and then came back to Korea. This time I went to a international high school. So it was like location was Korea, but my curriculum was all American. And then I went to college in Illinois, University of Illinois, and and then the story continues on, as I mentioned earlier. Came back to Korea to serve the military.
And even those like early years in terms of moving back and forth between various countries, like then how did you perceive it? I mean, I guess it was normal. It was like your life, but like, did you enjoy it? Was it frustrating? Was it challenging? Like, tell me a little bit about that background.
Yeah, so a lot of people would think that having to like move, like make new friends and move to unfamiliar places could be very daunting, especially for a younger age. But for some reason, like I loved meeting new people and exposing myself to new culture because I felt like in a way I didn't know any other way. Like staying in one place just felt like stagnant. So even now I feel like I've been in Korea for almost 6 years, so I get like the biggest itch to just like move out, like just for the sake of just moving and meeting new people. So I guess the only downside, I like meeting new people, those worked for me, and the only downside I feel from those experiences is this personality that I picked up. That makes me feel like I always have to be on the move.
And even in terms of like your own identity, in terms of what you most closely associate with, in terms of how you think, and even like if you have like an internal monologue, do you speak to yourself in like English and Korean, a combination of both?
Funny that you ask, because the only environment where I speak Korean is to my parents. And even like academic setting, it's all in English. So I associate Korean, and when I speak Korean, it feels a bit formal. And even like I am capable of expressing like a lot of like study or academic related topics in Korean, but at the same time, I feel like my personality when I speak Korean is suitable for when I talk to my parents. So it's almost like my whole worldview and values change when I do speak Korean, because when you talk to your parents, you adjust your language and vocabulary. So
and your parents, they're based in South Korea?
They are in Korea right now. Yeah.
Gotcha. You had mentioned that you attended University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. In terms of like your early career aspirations and even why you decided to attend that school. So, I'm from the Chicagoland area. And so all my friends, that's like their default school. And I know the Korean community there is quite large huge, as well. So I'm curious in terms of what your thought process was and what influences led you to start your career there.
Right. So growing up, one thing I think the biggest part of my childhood growing up was this love for roller coasters. So it all started by playing this game called Roller Coaster Tycoon. And so that's how I got interested in roller coasters. And obviously that led me to go to more theme parks. And like when I started playing the game, I didn't really have a serious thought about wanting to build roller coasters. But when I saw, as corny as it sounds, when I saw people come out from the rides, like that kind of joy on people's faces isn't something that you see on a daily basis. Like when people are happy, they just smile or laugh, but the sheer excitement and joy people express when they get off rides, it's like something that I really wanted to put on other people's faces as well. So my love for roller coasters from the game combined with seeing how people feel about roller coasters is what I like. That's how I started to think maybe I want to do that for life. So for the whole growing up experience, I was this guy who, like, when people talk about Lucas, they were like, oh, the guy who wants to build roller coasters. So that went on from literally like elementary school up until high school. So it was like my career was already set to building roller coasters. And so in order to do that, I needed to study civil engineering, structural engineering, and UIUC had a very good program for that. So I chose the school. So that's how I got into the whole field of civil engineering and structural engineering, which I majored in at UIUC.
Makes sense. And so that passion for roller coasters, that was from a young age, like when you were 10, 11, 12 years old?
Yep.
And have you been to Cedar Point before?
I have not.
Okay.
Like funnily, I've been to like a lot of Disney parks and Universals, but I haven't been to like the extreme like Six Flags or Cedar Point.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How about even in Seoul, are like amusement parks and roller coaster rides? Is that a big thing here? 'Cause I haven't seen them yet.
They have been like, there was a huge investment in theme parks back in like the 2000s and the 90s.
Okay.
But since then, the investment's been cut down like very heavily. So all the rides are run down, and there's barely any like new innovations in Korea, which is a shame.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
So even in terms of the college application process, I mean, UIUC has a great engineering program. Were you focused on going to school in the States, or had you also applied to schools in like South Korea and even in Europe?
Right. So my curriculum was entirely like an American curriculum. So I didn't even have a choice to apply to Korea. I mean, I could if I were to apply to a Korean university, it would have been the same as like an American applying to a Korean university. So that wasn't much of an option for me. So I mean, like, the only Korean education I got was the elementary school system. So most of the educations I got was very westernized. So I didn't have much there. Yeah.
Okay. And you had mentioned that in terms of your early interests, that piece, the amusement parks, the roller coaster rides, the smiles on people's faces, that was something that got you excited.
Yep.
But obviously you had pivoted, you ended up joining a startup.
Right.
In terms of your UIUC learning process, can you tell me a little bit about how your trajectory changed?
Yeah, sure. So I think to put it down simply, there were like three main reasons that led me to transition into a different career. So the first one was when I thought about building roller coasters, the keyword I could think of was like pure innovation and getting to be creative as you can be. But as I studied deeper in the field of structural engineering, I realized it's the most conservative field of engineering there can be, because I told you this earlier. So in like electrical engineering or mechanical engineering, if you make a mistake, machines break or electronics break. Whereas in civil engineering, if you do something wrong, people will literally die. So you have to the term that gets thrown around all the time is like a factor of safety. So factors of safety for structures that you design are like 10-fold or 20-fold. So you have to be super conservative, and that doesn't leave much room for building like really extreme, like 400-foot roller coaster that you think of in your head. So those there are very many limits. I guess like in a way, trying to break those limitations could be seen as being creative within the field of structural engineering, but it's not the kind of creativity that I pursued. So that was that was the first time when I realized maybe structural engineering isn't a path I want to pursue. The second reason was, so I didn't really think about the amount of, I only thought about the intensity of emotions that I would be casting on people's lives by building roller coasters, but I didn't really think about the breadth of it. And if you think about it, like just a fraction of people visit theme parks every year, and of those people, a small fraction of people can actually go on extreme roller coasters and enjoy them. So I realized like a very limited number of people will actually be able to enjoy the things I make. And like third year on, I realized I wanted to cast a broader impact on people and maybe make not more than just 10,000 people's lives happier every year. So that was the second reason. And third reason that I just recently realized is, as I said earlier, I almost identified as this person who wants to build roller coasters, and that's what everyone's been telling me growing up. So something that started as an internal motivation to be a roller coaster designer, without me realizing, has become something external. So even like when applying to college, I feel like it's that external validation and it's external satisfaction that I needed to meet. So like no one ever forced me to be a roller coaster designer, but that was like expected of me. Like I was this guy who likes roller coasters. So I realized, is that really what I want, or is that just become of me or expected of me to be? So that really gray area of, is this really what I want, or is this just for external validation, is like the final reason that I noticed very recently what changed my caused that transition.
Fascinating that you've realized this more recently, because on Twitter, it's like a big thing is to become the XYZ guy, right? It's like I am the habits guy, or I am the productivity guy, and I think a lot of people feel like there's a deep power to niching down quickly and finding your audience, but then on the flip side, it's like, well, is that really what you want to define yourself for the rest of your life? And I think a lot of people, especially like maybe early in their careers, they have a small interest in something and that becomes part of their identity, but then there's a feedback loop of like now everybody recognizes that that's that person's thing.
Precisely.
And it can be a trap sometimes if you're somebody that is quickly evolving and your like desires and your appetites change. So it's funny that you are kind of like realizing this more or appreciating the degree to which it was influential in your life now.
And if I look back, I feel like I say that I noticed that now, but I did realize that having that pure, like being internally motivated to pursue your career is like should come before finding external validation. Because as I was transitioning from wanting to pursue roller coasters to something else, it's like when I realized that that passion wasn't there anymore, what I did was like, it was like the biggest identity crisis, because imagine like wanting to be something for 15 years and now realizing that that's not for you. Like even that you've started a major in it. So that was like the biggest, I guess, like biggest career crisis that I've had in my life. So in order to find like a new path, what I did was there were like a list of things that I thought I would be interested in, like architecture, computer science. So I think it was junior year after this transition came after third year of school, and that's when everyone has their like second internships in the field that they want to work on. So I felt like I was running out of time, so I needed to like find something that I want to pursue in the long term real quick. So what I did was I still had like my structural engineering internship, which back like then felt really like obsolete almost. So after I came back from work, I would go to the library and have this list in front of me, and I would literally sit down in front of a computer and start doing that, like start pulling like 2-3 all-nighters on a row doing that. And my reasoning was whatever path you choose, eventually, like whether you like it or not, you will have to spend like that much time doing it in your career. And if you don't enjoy that process, maybe it's not for you. So I sat, and the perfect example I want to give is like, I thought I really loved architecture. So I signed up for like an architecture studio that's offered during the summer. So the first day I went in, I came out of the studio loving it. Oh, maybe this is for me. The second day I was like, maybe this isn't for me. And the third day I came out the door hating it, and I canceled that program. So even something that you feel like you love, if you do it for 3 days and nights in a row, like you will know if it's really, if it's for you. So then I was able to cross out a lot from that list. And one thing that did stick around, which I ended up choosing, was like digital design, user experience design. And so during those, like, let's say junior, senior years in college, as you were kind of figuring out what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy, the whole Korean military stuff, like, was that in the back of your mind? And it's interesting for me because as somebody who's like a Korean American living in Korea now, like, that is a normal part of somebody's life trajectory if they're, a male in Korea. And it seems like it can be quite disruptive in terms of navigating your career path. So how did you think about that, and how did that impact your career overall? Yeah, that was definitely one of the most stressful things that I had to deal with. So most people who do have to go to the military like have experience in Korea, like they spend the majority of their childhood or growing up in Korea, whereas I didn't. And most people follow the path of after your first year or the second year, take 2 years off and go to the military and come back so that you can continue your school and then get a job in the US. That's what most people do. Whereas for me, like, and then that works for a lot of Koreans who study in the US because they're part of the like Korean Student Association, and that's
your audio is slightly fading out, but you're good.
And that's what they like. That's the norm. Whereas I wasn't really involved in the Koreans with Korean citizenship, like their associations. So my thought process was I had a lot going on within like student organizations or extracurriculars in school, and I didn't want to like just cut that off. And it wasn't expected of me because the people who I was mostly associated with didn't have to go to the military. So I took a different path of not going to the military during my school year, and then decided to go after I graduated because I didn't want to like leave everything that I was part of.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And like overall, in terms of that decision and even the military experience, so I've heard like. I guess a lot of people that I've spoken to have not spoken at like all that highly of their experience, and they're like, "Man, it would be such a advantage had I not needed to spend that year and a half doing X, Y, or Z." In terms of your own experience, like how did you feel about it?
Maybe I'm like the first person you interview that speak highly of it because I didn't have to go to the camp that people actually get assigned to. So you have to take a physical before you get assigned. And I had a foot surgery when I was little, so I was assigned to I was able to commute from home to a local office. So local office being, it's like all different kind of government institutions. And for me, it was like the local online university. So online universities still have like headquarters, like different local branches. So I was assigned to a admin office in one of those offices. And I still cherish that experience so much because, to be honest, I was like the biggest snowflake growing up because I was like always surrounded by the same kind of people, but same kind as in people who are privileged enough to have like really good education growing up. Whereas the online university, the majority of the students are people who weren't fortunate to have that kind of experience. So later on in their like maybe 50s or 60s, they want to pursue further education, so they enroll in these classes. So hearing from their experiences, I was able to definitely like broaden my perspectives. That was like one benefits that I had from that experience, and the other is it's an admin office, so it's like you can think of it as a DMV. So when people visit these offices, they are by default kind of angry. Like there is no other reason to visit these offices unless you have complaints. So before that, I didn't have any experiences of like getting complaints, whereas here, like, and like these offices can get violent. So it was during COVID, so we had these like plastic, like acrylic panels around us. But without that, I'm pretty sure I would have gotten like some pencils thrown at me a few times. So those are like honestly experiences that I wouldn't have gotten before or afterwards. But that has definitely like set up this, I wouldn't say a wall, but I am definitely like much thicker skinned now, and I can take like harsh criticisms without really taking it personal.
Okay. So you drew some lessons from
exactly.
that experience.
Yeah.
It's funny because just like living here in Korea, for the most part, like people are very pleasant and kind and respectful of their personal space. But the one place where I feel like I see the most nasty kind of parts of their personality come out is in the subway station during rush hour. People are just like are vicious.
Just pushing. Yeah.
But I guess that's maybe another example of those admin offices. I better be there.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I've never really heard people scream at another person in an indoor space, like, at a full volume before, but that was almost like a weekly occurrence for me, so that's definitely an experience of a lifetime.
In terms of, like, even from a societal, cultural perspective, like, one thing that I'm interested in is the purpose that serving in the Korean military kind of serves, like for the people as well. And like you have a unique background in that you've spent time in a lot of other countries. Do you feel like your time in the military has changed your relationship with Korea at all in terms of just like being closer to the culture, or even on the opposite direction of like it distancing yourself from Korea? Do you feel like there's any dynamics there? Have you thought about that at all?
That's a very good question. Had I felt distanced from the Korean culture, I would have definitely felt much closer from that experience. but I feel like I was kept in touch with the Korean culture well enough so that like when I came to serve, it didn't feel like anything was alien. Because like even when I was living abroad, I would come back to Korea like every year. So I feel like it didn't feel like a special experience culturally per se. So yeah.
Makes sense. And then even in terms of you figuring out your career in your latter years in college, and then serving in the Korean military, and then like how did you think about career stuff after that? Did you have to set up your career situation immediately after you like finished your service, or and also like even in terms of working in Korea, was that the primary goal for you, or how were you thinking about things then?
Yeah, no, the initial plan was definitely to go back to the States to work or maybe do a master's right after. That's like, and I didn't want to waste the 2 years, as in terms of my like design career. I didn't want to waste my time and not do any design work during the 2 years I was serving. But at the same time, since I can't work as an employee while I'm part of the service, I did a lot of like pro bono nonprofit work, and also like did a lot of personal projects in terms of so that I can build up my portfolio to apply for jobs after my service was finished. But my service was finished on August of 2020, which was at the height of COVID. So moving away from Korea was not an option at all. Like not just to the States, but like nobody could travel back then. So that's why I started looking at career options in Korea, and there was a Korean company founded by 2 Korean Americans in Korea, who saw my LinkedIn profile and reached out to hire me as a product manager.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so you also had, I guess now, are doing like some independent work,
Right.
Building apps, doing a lot of stuff. Like in terms of the whole solopreneur, like digital nomad, that stuff. When you had like graduated from college and then spent time in the military and then started your first job, was any of this stuff on your radar? Had you known about it through Twitter or other social media platforms?
So looking back, I feel like I had all the signs of like starting entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
So even like I mentioned that I did a lot of personal projects during my military service, and those projects weren't just like redesigning existing work. Like I was coming up with new services and new designs. And back then I thought I was doing design work, but the reason why I was hired as a product manager was these projects not only just included designing a new service, but a lot of like user research and implementation as well. So without realizing, I was already doing a lot of like product management work, and the fact that I started all these projects on my own, I guess was in a hindsight was a factor that led into me starting my own independent work.
Interesting.
Currently, yeah.
And the first job that you had done at the startup, like in terms of what you were doing and what your responsibilities were, did they overlap or with some of the stuff that you ended up doing in terms of design space and building apps and all that stuff?
So the projects that I did before I joined as a product manager was still very like predominantly, like it did have factors of product management and reading into analytics and metrics, but it was still very heavily on design. But through the 2.5 years of experience working as a product manager, I was able to pick up the more important, like prioritizing which feature to build on, and seeing which features actually going to work for users and bring in more profits to move forward with products. So those are the new skills that I did learn over those 2.5 years.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, you had mentioned earlier in terms of if you spend 2 or 3 days like pulling multiple all-nighters,
right.
and you can kind of realize what it is you're passionate about and what it is you're not. When you were working at the startup for those 2.5 years, did you feel like you had a better sense for what it is you wanted to do, or what was giving you energy?
So I did love most aspects of product management. The one thing that I realized wasn't for me was not having like 100% ownership of the product itself. So I did have ownership of, say, like a feature or a project, but the final decision was always up to a bigger owner. In this case was the co-founders of the company. So that like when I when I had differences in opinion of what I think we should prioritize and what they thought was more important, was when I realized maybe I want to try having the final say and executive decisions for the product that I own. Yeah, so that's the biggest takeaway from that experience.
You have you heard of Paul Graham?
Yes,
And,
of
okay,
course,
so
yeah.
have you read his essay, A Project of One's Own, before? Have you
I
come across
don't think so, no.
Okay, but it's kind of in the same vein. It's
Uh-huh.
like he was stressing how important it is for you to have a project that you
Mhm.
have full ownership over,
Mhm.
because the agency that gives you and
Yeah.
the energy that it gives
Right.
you is like such a crucial piece
Yeah.
of like well-being in general.
It's like literally what drives you to work on the project, because like if you don't have the executive decision for your product, like what motivates you to work on it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you had started to realize that
Yeah.
about your own work,
Mhm.
when you were at the startup, were you also working on things on the side or not yet?
No, I was working like 12 to 14 hours at this startup, so I literally had no time or energy to work on anything else, which is one another reason why it motivated me to quit, because I like whenever I have new ideas, I just jot it down on my notes, and that note was getting longer and longer, and I could see that it was not getting any shorter anytime soon.
Yeah.
And like some of the ideas I was just like looking at it on a daily basis, and I was like, oh, I really want to work on that, but I just don't have the time for it now. And that overlapping with me being burnt out working 14 hours a day, it was just like a very easy decision for me to leave.
So how long ago was that now when you left the startup?
When I quit, it was February of 2022.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's been 2.5 years now.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so you decide to quit, and was there a plan or thinking about like what would happen in the next few months?
A smart person would have a plan, but again, like being burnt out almost like left me with no other option, because I think the very final decision was made when I started feeling like my health was deteriorating. So that's what made it even easier for me to make that final decision. So for the first 6 months, I didn't really do much. I just knew that I had to start coding or learn how to code in order to make things that I wanted to make. So the first 6 months was just like sitting down, like waking up and sitting down, just chilling, learning how to code 2 hours a day. And
Wow.
that's how I spent the first 6 months of that.
And even like during your time, your 2.5 years at the startup, in terms of how you would classify or describe your life, like was it for the most part just like working 24/7? Or the reason why I ask is because like you end up taking this new trajectory, right? And I guess exercising your creative muscles to a much greater extent than you ever did before. And so I'm curious, like maybe there are other people like Lucas out there, but they haven't taken the jump yet.
Right.
Like where are they? You know, like how do I connect with more of them? How do you like pull them into an ecosystem? Or is that even possible given, you know, the professional setting that they're in? So I'm just curious in terms of your life then.
I think there are definitely a lot of people, especially in the product management space, who would want more ownership and want to start their own projects. If you're working 12 to 14 hours a day, I'm pretty sure you've already made the decision to quit. And if you haven't, like unless your body's like at 100%, like I feel like health is the most important thing. So if you are working 14 hours a day and you're sacrificing your health, I feel like you should always consider the other option. And if like there are a lot of people already working on side projects while working full time, and they're all over Twitter. So I feel like that's a great starting point to see if working on side project is something that you can pursue full time or longer time.
And how about like even the startup ecosystem in Seoul, the degree to which you were exposed or familiar with it? Because I mean, you were working at a startup, but it's not like you were the founder of that company per se. Did you do anything like whether it was networking events or just like hearing pitches from other founders or even maybe contributing your own ideas? Were you involved at all to any extent?
Like within the company and within the scope of the product that we were working on, I did have a lot, like I was able to contribute a lot, but unfortunately we didn't have, like I was like the fourth member to join the company, and like it when I left, it was like 30 plus people. So we were very focused on growing our own projects, so we didn't have any chance to work on projects that are not tightly related to the product. So yeah, I didn't have the luxury to venture out of the scope of what we were working on.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then tell me a little bit more about these first handful of months after you had left, because like you were, I guess, educating yourself to some extent, right? You were trying some of these experimental projects.
Yeah.
Was it like difficult? Were you wondering like, hey, maybe should I go back and get a regular job? Was there a clear path that started to emerge as you continued to work on your own projects?
Yeah. So the biggest challenge for me was because the need for product manager position the demand was so high. I was getting a lot of offers, and the most difficult part was turning down those offers because it was just a decision between complete unknown and complete known. And so I had to keep reminding myself all these lists of things that I wanted to do. And I think I love taking risks, and I think that's what's needed of someone. There are many options, many different trajectories you can take when you do decide to work on your own side project. One is, have a job that gives you great work-life balance and continue on your projects. Or if you're someone like me who can never like focus on multiple things at once, because I think that's a very ADHD thing to do. You either hyper-fixate on one project, or you can't at all. So I was someone who, if I had a job, I would put everything into my job and not have any energy left on the side to work on something else. So I had to remind myself that, so that I could refrain from taking those offers. So that was like the biggest challenge for the first 6 months. Another challenge was obviously learning how to code. But when people, like, one of the most frequent question I get asked from my videos and the project that I post is, how does anyone get to start building apps? So back then, like that, it was only 2.5 years ago, but it was a completely different world because we didn't have Gen AI. Now you can so back then what I did was I took a basic like computer science course because I wanted to get like all the concepts in my toolkit. So there's this really good program called 100 Days of Swift UI. So their agenda is, if you put like 2-3 hours a day for just 100 days, you will be able to build anything you want. So I was really sold by that idea. It's completely free. So I was doing that for like the first 60 days of the 100 days. And after 60 days, I got cocky and I was like, oh, I don't have to finish this. I can do it. So what I did was I went on to build real apps, such as like, there are a lot of YouTube tutorials on how to build like a weather app, or how to build like an Instagram clone. And those are like the bare minimum that, if you know how to build a weather app or a social app, you basically know everything about programming. So after watching those videos, I was able to finally build the things that I had envisioned from my lists.
Interesting.
But that came with a lot of challenges, because obviously like you can't just like be I can build apps now. I had to ask around a lot of friends who are programmers. But now you can just ask Claude or ChatGPT, so it's easier than ever.
So your engineering background and the professional experience at the startup,
right.
like maybe you had some like small building blocks, but there really wasn't a foundation in terms of the direction that you went?
Oh, so the story I love to share is I did take a CS 101 class, which is basically like the final is just a quiz. You don't even get to program. It's like an intro to computer science knowledge and not programming. And so I was able to take that, but I also took CS 125, which is where you start to learn programming. Okay. And that's still very easy. Like most people don't struggle with it. I had to drop out because I absolutely hated it. Like that shows how much of a non-programmer I am.
Wow.
And even someone like me can pick up programming like in 6 months. So like I'm not like, people would question, that's because your brain is geared towards programming, but I'm really not. I dropped out of the intro to CS class So if I can do it, like anyone can do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's funny that you say that because I had taken the introductory computer science course at Stanford, and it basically had somewhat of a similar experience where I did okay in it, but like compared to other people who very much were like wired for that those kinds of problems, I realized like, okay, there's a big difference between myself and them. Right. So there's still some hope is what you're saying.
Yeah. Like I hated, like I was okay with like the algorithm part and the how, like everything about how it works, but just like having to memorize the syntax and having to solve really stupid bug that comes from like not putting a comma, like those things are the things that I hated, and those things are how AI can help you with the most. So I think it is truly a world for people who have ideas but just don't know how to implement them.
How about now in terms of the coding that you do? Like, what's your relationship between with coding? Like, is it still a frustrating part of the job for you? Or
actually,
do you enjoy
not at all. Like, it's one part that I look forward to the most because as long as you get the syntaxes right, it's the one area in the whole product development cycle where you can instantly see what you build. Like design, you have to think about what design you would come up with, and then like you might not be happy with the design, but with coding, as long as you know what to get done and how to get it done, you will have the result. So what I do is just like go on Claude and this can get into like the whole conversation about prompting, but what I do is basically like write a 300-400 word paragraph into Claude on what different features that I want to build with like some technical requirements as well. And from my experience so far, it came out very successful when I asked those prompts. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. And so you have become a heavy like AI utilizer.
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's funny because I interview a lot of people of different backgrounds, some in like the investment profession, some people in like technology and media, and some that have like founder backgrounds. And a lot of people will tell me about how amazing and cool AI is, but rarely I come across somebody who is using it on a regular basis. Yeah. Really? In ways that like surprise me. And so it's funny I guess especially in the world that you're in, building apps and all that stuff seems like a very obvious use case. So that makes a lot of sense. And so I guess like tell me a little bit about the past 2 years or so, and also like what your thought process was when you were doing the 100 days of code kind of program. Like, I guess, did you have like a couple years of runway to just like experiment? Were you like, okay, I'm going to make a bunch of money with a handful of these ideas? And like, I guess like what is the starting point in the thought process there?
Right. So my sister works in finance, and my parents also are very good at investing, and I think they took all the investment and finance genes away from me because I made like the most terrible choice of putting all my savings into stocks. And this was 2020, and I invested in a lot of Korean stocks as well. So I thought I had like 2.5 years of runway when I quit, but turns out after 1 year, like that runway has like cut down to half of what it was. So I was in a position where I either had to like get a job after like 6 months because it was just getting hopeless, or to start something like where I can get a new stream of income. So I really didn't want to get a job because I knew that, again, like I said earlier, if I have a job, I would commit 100% to it. And at that point, I had already learned how to program, and I was at a point where I was like, oh, I can actually start building things I envisioned now. So what I did was I started my own design agency. And a lot of people also ask me how I get the first few clients when I started a design agency. So there were two ways. One was there's a Korean design platform. It's like Upwork or what's the other freelance platform, Fiverr, where those are the platforms where clients come and publish or look through the portfolios of designers and hire people that they think it's a good fit. Whereas this platform, it's more contest based. So a client would post a sample design that they want with requirements, and people would bid into the contest. So it's a really huge win-win for both parties, because for designers or agencies that are just starting, they don't need a portfolio to be selected, because all they need is a good submission.
Wow.
And for the clients, for the people who publish the contest, they have all these options to look through and then choose from already made projects. So
and the risk is that if you don't win it, then you kind of has put a lot of work in, and there's not a result. But
yes.
if you're confident in your skill set, then there's a lot of upside.
For early agencies and designers, that's still not really a loss, because you get to build your portfolio, because you can use the content you submitted. So that's another platform that I do want to bring, because I haven't, like, I did a deep research, and there's not a platform like that outside of Korea, and I think it would work. So that's something that's on my list as well.
Okay.
So that's how I got my first few clients, and other clients I got was actually from the projects that I've submitted on published on Medium. So the projects that I did during my military service, while I did that purely out of passion and wanting to build up my portfolio, that did get a lot of reach, and a lot of clients actually got generated from that.
Wow.
Yeah. I guess like that's also one of the reasons why I was confident that I could start an agency, because even before I started the agency, I had like requests on, do you do like design work?
Okay. Very cool. And so I guess like today, or even over the past couple of years, so you split your time between doing some agency work and some personal work as well?
Yep. So when I started my design, the agency work, it was supposed to be just on the side to keep myself afloat, right? But that became much more successful than I expected. So I ended up spending like literally 100% of my time just doing agency work for the until earlier this year, actually.
Okay.
And then that's when early this year was when I realized that's not what I quit my full-time job for. Like, I wanted to build apps, but working for a one-person agency is almost like just working for a company, because I'm not really pursuing my own visions.
Sure.
So that is why I started to find more external pressures to motivate myself to build apps, because as much as I want to deny the dopamine you get from getting a lot of clients and getting a lot, like seeing your bank account stack up is really really high. So I needed another source of motivation to work on my apps, and that's one of the reasons why I started making YouTube videos, because I felt like if I put what I'm doing out there publicly, I would hold myself more like publicly accountable to more consistently work on that.
And tell me a little bit about some of the inspirations for the apps that you decide to pursue and build, because I feel like a lot of them are tackling big, either like social, societal problems. That like one of them was related to mental health and suicide prevention, right? I think another one was like related to like a weather app, and there was some like climate change dynamic in there as well, right? So like these are like some pretty ambitious types of projects and ideas that kind of come to mind. Is that does that emerge kind of just naturally within your own mind about like what problems can I solve in the world that will have an impact, or like tell me a little bit about the influences there.
So the two projects that you mentioned are both projects that I did many years ago, and my perspectives on which projects to work on has changed since then. In both ways, I will never work on projects where I don't personally relate to the problem. So my one and only, I guess you could say like a checklist for which project to work on is it has to be a problem that I feel on a daily basis. And I have to have a vision for how I would solve that problem for myself. And because I feel like once you nail that down, all you need to do is find a way to scale that solution and distribute it. So at first I did tackle a lot of societal problems, because I think that was a phase when I transitioned from building roller coasters to doing design so that I can cast a broader impact. So it was calibrated more towards wanting to create a bigger societal impact. Whereas, and then after having worked on those projects, I realized that requires literally a team of people to solve those problems. So now I am focusing on issues that I can solve on a smaller scale, like start at a smaller scale and build up from there.
And even your philosophy, like in the conversation that we shared, maybe it was a week ago, maybe it was a couple of weeks ago, in terms of like your own ambitions and aspirations about building a company, right? Within the startup ecosystem, there's this like common definition of success, which is like, you know, you raise some venture rounds, you become a unicorn, you go public, you have this massive team. Like in terms of your own aspirations and how you think about this, and there's a very, you know, whole separate side of the world in the solopreneur space about like being independent, being small, being nimble,
bootstrapped.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about like the kinds of projects that you want to start and sustain and how you think about it.
So I think a really good way to bring it up is talking about Headspace, the app. So I think it's a great example of what I don't envision to be. So I absolutely loved Headspace and used it every day back in like 2018 and 2019. And that was when the app was still very much focused on pure meditation and providing good meditation content. So I would just go on the app and you didn't even have any other features other than just pressing a single button and starting meditation. Now, because they had to scale up, they added like sleep, they added like routines and maybe diet. Like it's become a whole like lifestyle management app. And that's when I stopped using the app because that's not the value that I was looking for. So I think, I don't know if it's like a term that's already coined, but I want to be sort of like an anti-startup, because I feel like as you want to scale, you have to add so many features that distract you from the core feature that you wanted to build initially. And I feel like in doing so, you lose so many initial customers that was loyal to you from the get-go. And I feel like those customers, like in a long-term lifetime value providing way, I feel like they do provide the most value into the app. And because I don't want to lose those customers, I want to focus on smaller problems, but making sure that those problems are solved and just maintaining that solution. And I feel like as long as you maintain that solution well, they will stick to your app in the long term.
That makes a lot of sense. It is a very unorthodox approach to business building in general, I would say. But there are a lot of people that I think are pursuing that path a lot more now, at least. You had mentioned that the two projects that I had referenced as it related to like the weather app and suicide prevention were like older projects. In terms of the more recent projects that you have worked on and launched, can you share about a couple of those and also on like what you're most excited about right now?
So the first project that I put it out there really publicly was an app that helps you create like a 30-day challenge and track that challenge by taking photos. So the very specific example I have on the app is like a stretch challenge where you can take a photo of your doing like a front split and you can create like a time lapse of those splits so you can see a visual progress of your splits.
Cool.
That's how Tiger found me as well, the YouTube video of me making that app. I made that app purely to test two things. One was if I can build an MVP, because this was a phase when I was like, oh, I really need to start building apps and not do agency work. So I wanted to test if I can build an app that I envisioned within 1 week, because I feel like especially because I'm building such like small core features, I feel like anyone should be able to build fast and test that. So that was one hypothesis that I wanted to test. And the second was, will creating a video about it like generate reach? And that video has gotten almost like 200,000 views as of now. So the second hypothesis was definitely proven, and the first was obviously proven because I put the video out there. So that was the first project, and I didn't like monetize that app at all because it was purely for testing purpose. And the second video I put out there is a focus time tracker for people with ADHD who can't focus for even like longer than a minute. So the feature there are many similar like ADHD focused apps out there, but this one app online, it's called Forget Work. And one feature that I really love about that app is it has a chime every 1 minute. So for people with ADHD, it's so easy to like lose track of time. It's called like time blindness. But having that 1 minute chime like locks you back into focus and makes you realize that you are actually supposed to be focusing. I absolutely love that app, but it only came in like a Chrome tab or plugin service. So I thought that would serve really well as a mobile app. So I built that. It didn't do like all the metrics, like video metrics on YouTube did better than the first one, but it didn't get picked up by the algorithm. So it only has like 10,000 views. But even from that, I got like more than 1,000 users just from that video because I didn't do it like any other marketing or app store optimization. So again, it's proven that having a good quality video, YouTube video out there still works as a good marketing channel.
Interesting. Tell me, I'm curious about the whole video piece of the equation as well, in terms of like what initially got you excited into it. And I know you have like, at least as a passion project of like photography as well. So like when you had launched that video, especially the one that is like close to 200K views at this point, that must have been a pretty big dopamine hit in terms of like, especially being an early like YouTube kind of creator. In terms of your thought process and experimentation with video stuff, was it primarily oriented towards I want this to be a complement to the products that I'm building and maybe like a product market fit testing dynamic? Or is there some potential for YouTube to be its own independent thing as well?
So one thing I really want to emphasize to myself and a lot of people who make videos is that getting more views and getting more audience of a social, like a video that you put out on a social platform should never be my primary goal, because however good quality of a video you publish, it might not get selected and get a lot of reach. It's just about algorithm. It doesn't really matter the quality of the video. So because that's not ensured, I feel like the primary purpose for the video should be a little more like an internal thing. So my purpose for posting those videos is number one, to motivate myself to work on apps, and two, as I was making those videos, like when I was writing scripts, I of course have to talk about my product, and you have no idea how much changes I've made into the design and features of the product itself as I was making the video. Because when you're making the video, you think about the audience, and you can have a more like objective view of the app while you're making the video. So that was like definitely a side of the creation process that I didn't expect to get, but I guess those are the two main purposes of why I make videos, and the reach and the downloads I get through those videos is just like an added bonus.
That makes sense. And it seems like it's a very healthy way to go about it, right? Because it's very obvious when you see like algorithm chasers, right? Exactly, so it's like they're trying to figure out what it is that will go viral. And I think there are unfortunate consequences of that type of behavior, like long-term consequences. But even to your second point of like it helping you think through the problem that you're solving in a new way, like even with the podcast, for example, sometimes I'll have a conversation with somebody, and in my mind when I'm having the conversation, I'll be like, maybe it didn't go as well, or maybe I was fumbling over my words here, or maybe it was a little bit of an awkward situation here. And I realize how much I'm in my head when I go back and I watch the replay again. It's like, oh, it wasn't nearly as bad. It seemed to flow well. And then I share it with other people and I get positive, feedback. It's like, it is just another vantage point for you to kind of look at the situation. Right? So I guess, like even right now, and I'm curious in terms of the last couple of years as well, like your time in Seoul. So like part of the reason we had a conversation before was because, I reached out. I was like interested in people creating in Seoul, and we had a fun chat. You've been here now for 5+ years, right? In terms of now, like quote unquote community or other collaboration opportunities, is that something that is even like important or valuable to you? And have you found that here in Korea?
The I guess the biggest challenge I face in the past 2 years when I went fully independent making apps is the lack of community. And as someone who loves meeting new people, that has always been a problem for me. And it's one of the reasons why I looked into leaving Korea. We can go to the hopeful part later, but one problem that I see is that even when I publish the YouTube video out there that's shot in Korea, less than 1% of my audience is Korean.
Wow.
And I do get very maybe less than 10 comments that are written in Korean who get amazed how things like this is being done in Korea. I try to reach out to them saying, let's meet up and they claim themselves to be solopreneur as well. But when I do reach out, they are very adamant about actually meeting up. And I had a talk with another Korean guy who grew up in abroad for his lifetime. And he's also experienced something very similar, how when it's in Korean culture where when you bond, you create the deepest bond, but to go into that bubble, they have a very high barrier to get into that. So for me and for a lot of people who grew up in a more Western culture, it's very easy to just meet up with a new person, whereas here they have to get through so many huddles to get through the barrier of wanting to meet a new person. And I think that is one of the biggest reasons why a solopreneur community isn't formed yet, because if it's within a company, you're forced to create connections, where solopreneurs, you have to choose to be connected with other person. That just isn't incentivized within the Korean culture, is what I have been realizing.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny for me being here, knowing a little bit of the culture, but not it that deeply. I had crossed paths with, I think she's in her maybe early 20s, but she was a professional in the consumer goods and packaging industry. And she worked for international companies, but here in Korea.
Right.
And then she spent 3 months in San Francisco, and she loved it, and she wants to move there and be there permanently. Right. And when she came back to Korea, she was I think she was a little bit depressed.
Of,
having tasted American culture,
right.
And then coming back here, and she was before I could bump shoulders with somebody and just strike up a conversation, and then potentially become friends with them and business partners and all of that. And so she when she came back to Korea, she was trying that a little bit, and then she just got I guess maybe depressed or disappointed with the reaction. It's people don't do that. They don't want to do that. It comes off as weird or unusual.
Definitely.
So it kind of speaks a little bit to this cultural dimension.
One thing I had to get used to when I came back here was I would strike up a conversation in an elevator or at a gym. Especially at a gym, it's so normal to just strike up conversations with whoever is on a bench or something. Here I did that, and then people looked at me like I was a weirdo. And that was something that I miss so much about the culture there. But just culturally, I don't think it's ever going to be that, because it's been formed over hundreds of years. I guess we just have to find a way to maybe create a hybrid solution for that culture to maybe incentivize meeting with complete strangers outside of your social circle.
For sure. And I think probably in terms of perspective or preference, if you're somebody that was born and raised in Korea and you don't have any let's say global aspirations or to do anything with people abroad, then maybe finding a community isn't as important for you, because you have your own tight network here in Korea. But it does seem and maybe these are just very few number of people, so it would only be serving a very small percentage of individuals, but that people that were born and raised in Korea but have are kind of international or globally minded, and like want a community that is more open and collaborative, but it just doesn't exist here because of the culture, and maybe serving like those specific people. Like you are a very unique example. Your friend that grew up outside of Korea is probably a unique example. Like my friend that I had met, who's in her early 20s and just spent some time in SF, is like a pretty unique example. But to at least bring that demographic into the same ecosystem seems like I don't know, maybe there's some hope there.
No, like the demand we feel is very high, so there is definitely a hope there.
And it's funny because when I talk to even some Koreans in the startup ecosystem, I think they also maybe like subconsciously want a community that is more supportive, kind of positive sum mentality, sharing information, all of that. But they are not going to be the ones to initiate something like that, right? Because it's the cultural barriers too maybe too much.
This is like my very personal perspective, and I don't know if people would agree on it, but I feel like the more centralized the community is, I feel like people are much prone to join that. Like, for example, there is a solopreneur community like formed by one single person, and he creates all these like different, like he calls it like Solopreneur season 3, season 4, and he recruits a bunch of people into this set very like curriculumized program, and then people sign up like left and right. I think like each season they get almost like 100 people who want to join, and it's literally called Solopreneur community.
Interesting.
When people can see what they what they can expect, and when it's like set in a very organized program, I feel like people are much more willing to join because they really love having certainty, whereas just reaching out to another solopreneur who are active is venturing into the unknown in a way. So I feel like that's the biggest difference there is culturally. And again, like if you can find a hybrid solution between the two, I feel like you can also target people who grew up here. But it's a choice you have to make, I guess.
It's the part of the beauty of the internet and doing a podcast and all of that stuff is that you can touch so many people in different places. But inevitably over time, in terms of like retaining those relationships, like making them feel more real, the in-person dynamic is pretty crucial. Definitely. And so like even for myself, like I've been active on Twitter and starting to make friends like all over the world. And some of those people are, passing through South Korea. And so we have the opportunity to meet up in person. And as soon as I have a conversation with them, it changes the whole dynamic of our online interactions as well. And so my hope is that like even if some of these relationships start out online, that they can see other people within the ecosystem that are meeting up in person, and then hopefully maybe they'll be incentivized to do more in-person events as well. Sure, so it's something that I'm hopeful for, and we'll see over the course of the next handful of months. It's funny because everybody that I talk to, and maybe my sample selection is very skewed, just giving the network that I've had touch points with already. But a lot of people are like, it's something that sounds cool and I'd be interested in, and yet it doesn't like exist in a very real sense per se.
Is like, can I ask you a question? So I feel like going back to how I create apps, I feel like the one advice I give everyone who wants to start their own services, like monetize super early on, because I didn't monetize a few of my apps, and I can never find a way to, for people to like people's willingness to use the app. And I feel like the easiest way to really put it in metrics on whether people like this service or not is obviously if they're gonna pay for it or not. So, and I got for this current app that I'm working on right now, I turned it into a paid only app after my initial launch, and I have one single like 1-star review, and that review is saying, it's not free anymore. So that's like so I feel like if you monetize early on, you can avoid those negative reviews and also like be able to have a very accurate gauge on whether your service is usable or viable or not in the long term. So I was wondering, like, for your community, like if you have any plans to monetize it early on.
So what I've seen of different communities that I've kind of studied already is like there's two maybe very polar opposite models, right? Like one is they look at it from a business lens and they say, if I make this free, I can scale this really quickly to thousands and thousands of quote unquote members, right? And maybe those members aren't like gung ho about it or like are not super invested, but on paper it looks cool to like companies or to different advertisers, and you can monetize a really large network of saying, hey, I've got 30,000, let's say, Koreans across the world that are all part of this community. Can we do an event together, or can we do a business collaboration? And big enterprises that are, if you want to get their attention and potentially do some cool stuff with them, like they care about the big numbers, right? Yeah. And then on the polar opposite view is like, you have a very small, tight-knit group of people, and they are paying like a very high premium for a product. So maybe it's like $100 per month, right? And they know they're part of this community, but they know everyone really well, and they're vetted and high quality. So
it's basically startup versus bootstrapped.
Yeah. It's very, very similar
for communities.
In terms of how I've thought about this, like, one, I do plan to monetize early on, and I want to do that because I think even psychologically, if somebody is paying for something, then they are maybe a little bit more invested in the community of like that's a sunk cost for them. And so I don't want it. I think that if you sell something as free, it can be maybe perceived as like cheap as well. And I also want to gate between the people who actually would value a community like this and those who are just going to be kind of like lurkers. Because I think the tricky thing about community building is it is a very like mimetic dynamic, where if I see like Lucas in the community and he's liking and commenting and being supportive on other people's posts, then the propensity for me to take the same action is much, much higher, right? But if it's a lot of people in there and they're all lurking and they're not really sharing or collaborating or sharing ideas and doing things, then the community is going to die. Right. And so the early members are really, really important. And so I'm trying to be as thoughtful as possible. So like one, I do plan to make it a paid community. I don't think I'm going to charge like a really premium price in the beginning. I'm just mostly going to use it as a gate. And if I can deliver more value at the end of a year than that person kind of puts in, then that will be like a win as a starting point. Maybe there's more fun experimental stuff that you can do after that. But like even for me, and I think I might have mentioned this the last time we spoke, was I've been a part of a handful of online kind of like learning communities. Two things that have stood out in terms of like notes that I've taken. One is, even if it's like $200 for the entirety of the year, and I find one person in that community who I end up collaborating with or doing a business idea with, then it pays for itself, for the in full, right? So that's like one kind of way that I've thought about the value that these communities can bring. Is if it's just even like, if you're starting a project, you know how hard it is when you're kind of putting things out into the void. If you can have 3 or 4 people that are kind of supporting you in that effort, that could sometimes be the difference of whether or not you stick with something or you just like stop that creative project altogether, right? So I think there's like some value there directly. And then maybe the second observation that I've seen is when there is a single person who is kind of like held accountable for the entirety of the community, it's much easier to kind of want to be a part of that community as compared to it's like a corporation or some amorphous entity that has started, something like I think of like Lenny's newsletter is like Lenny is the face of, his community. I think of other communities and it's a kind of a double-edged sword, because if you take that individual responsibility to be like the leader of that community and it does poorly, obviously it's going to affect on your long-term reputation and all of that stuff, right? So my hope is that like, okay, if I declare like, okay, I'm going to be like the leader of this community, come and join it because like I'll help you feel welcome and connect you with other people. That alone will have some like lasting value, and hopefully it doesn't go in the other direction where it's like, oh, this is a terrible community. This is going terribly, and it's gonna hurt my reputation.
Right. So. I laugh because just like in the past 1 week, there was like a huge drama within the solopreneur community on Twitter. Like one of the leaders, like Mark Liu, he builds like boilerplate for SaaS, and this whole his boilerplate was prone to a critical security breach, and someone pointed that out, and then someone pointed it out through private email, and then let him know that there is a security concern, and then he rewarded him with like $300, and the community is saying, oh, that's like he should have rewarded it so much more, and then like that whole post he posted about how he rewarded $300 for the benefit, just like caused so much drama over Twitter, and then so like one person can have so much impact on the whole community as a whole. Yeah. So definitely.
It's also there's a very scary dimension to it as well, right? But that is, I think, some of the risk that you take if you try and start something new is there's also the possibility that it fails. Yeah. And I think as long as people know that, hey, I'm going to try this in good faith and see what happens, even if at the end of 12 months it fails for whatever reason, if like it's too hard to get these people attention and for people to be collaborative and open-minded and all of that stuff in this like digital setting, then at least them knowing like, okay, he tried this in good faith, I think will be respectable enough.
Exactly, and you'll regret it unless you actually do it. So if it's been on your mind for the longest time, then you just have to do it, right?
100%. Well, I don't know, I think I might have mentioned this to you before, but I had interviewed this guy, Quang Do, and he is the founder of this community called Overseas Vietnamese, and his community is like primarily free and open, and it's more geared towards professional development, but people have found friendships through it. And so it surprised me for a while, like the Korean diaspora is even larger than the Vietnamese diaspora, and I feel like, especially within like Korean identity or Korean culture, that people are very patriotic about their heritage. And so it surprised me that something like this, in terms of a global ecosystem, has not cropped up, right? And in terms of like experimentation opportunities and things that would be cool, there's a lot of things that get me excited, but maybe there are reasons why this hasn't been able to become a thing.
My other question would be like, what is your ideal like user journey for people who join the community? Like there could be someone who want partnerships or to find a co-founder through the community, or you could just it could serve as a self-motivation by seeing other people's journeys. Like what would you define as like the perfect user for this community who find the most value from your service?
And it's funny because this is I would say maybe a hyper-targeted approach of like kind of niching down, right? And I would say I don't know if I am taking that approach, and maybe that'll bite me in the butt in the long run. But my ideal situation is like whether it's like personal development or professional development, kind of plugging them into the right niches within this broader community that I think would be helpful, right? So as an example, a lot of people that are excited about podcasts and podcasting, right? Is like there are a handful of people in my network that I know, like, okay, I can point them to if they're trying to start a podcast on what are the helpful things for them to get started and to get up the learning curve as quickly as possible. And also just to find a community of other people that are passionate about podcasting, right? On the other hand, there might be like, let's say college students in the Korean diaspora that have a very specific thing of what they think they want to do in their careers, right? So if I've got like, let's say a couple hundred people that are college students within the community, and then I also have people that are in their 20s and 30s, and if maybe like had the paths already that they hope to do, is like giving them an opportunity to speak with those people, creating some sort of like mentor-mentee-ship dynamic, right? And then on the flip side is like, a lot of the interesting venture capital funds that have cropped up over the past handful of years have oftentimes emerged from like media companies. It's like somebody starts a podcast and now they have an audience that is really like gung-ho about investing in tech and venture and all of that stuff. and that gives them opportunities for cool types of investments.
Right.
So if I know like, okay, there's a handful of investors out there in, let's say, like the Korean diaspora, and there are a lot of founders that are like college or early 20s working on cool things, like being able to do like a matchmaking system type of dynamic as well. So there are like so many different things that I feel like I could experiment with, but I would say generally speaking, it's like personal development, professional development, and then maybe also just finding a few like friends or a small community to bounce ideas off of in the space that you're most interested in.
So what I'm hearing, if I'm understanding correctly, is instead of defining like one special target audience, you want to have like all different channels where people can just flock to wherever they see fit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It would be relatively self-organizing.
Right.
Like it would be a pretty decentralized model. And like I think I would have to grow this maybe a little bit slowly. But I think hopefully the differentiating factor would be that people will have an opportunity to get to know other people within the community on a deeper level, right? Through like these types of conversations. Exactly. So if somebody in the community joins and they're like, I want to become a doctor, I'm interested in medicine, and they listen to this conversation and they're like, this isn't something that I'm interested in, then they can kind of self-select out, right? Of like, okay, then they need to find a different, smaller community within the ecosystem. But like, for example, I have a couple of friends from my days at Stanford who are like currently doing their residency at like top medical schools in the US right now. And so I would say, hey, you need to go find these people and collaborate with them and talk to them, right, about their path. But then if somebody that is interested in like, oh, I'm in a product design role and I want to do something related to solopreneurship, but I don't really know where to start, then I'd be like, okay, go listen to our conversation that Lucas and I had. And that can kind of be a starting point for them, right? So it is like relatively open-ended and kind of self-selecting. But I'm also big on kind of interdisciplinary learning, where even my podcast, for example, is kind of all over the place, where I'll have conversations with like professional investors from my finance days, and then I'll have conversations with people like you who are on a very different side of the spectrum, right? And there are some like sometimes pretty beautiful connections that can be made where somebody is working on a project in a very different domain, and yet them being exposed to somebody else doing in a completely different domain can actually spark some sort of intrigue or new project or collaboration opportunity. So yeah, all this to say, it is quite open-ended at this point and not as specific of like, this is for, solopreneurs in Seoul, for example.
I mean, like hardly any community is very like specific to a group unless there is already a community formed and then they want to like branch out from the community. So it makes sense that you want to go take the general route.
Yes.
From an implementation standpoint, so I can see it being like either like a Discord group where there's like no format, just like channels and people can talk freely, or a standalone like website. And I feel like the benefit of having that would be like the displaying different information and like presenting how all different data is like available within the group. Like that could be definitely more like designed better than a Discord channel, whereas that would be very costly to create a platform like that. So I'm curious as to which path you're willing to take.
So early stage, I'm just going to do utilize tools that already exist that are kind of like plug and play dynamic. And so primarily I'm thinking Slack as the starting point, with channels dedicated to specific topics, right? So like investing, let's say entrepreneurship, other things related to that. And then it will be like a combination of a podcast, the Slack channel, and I'm blanking. Oh, a newsletter as well, right? And so I imagine that some people would just be like, I don't want to deal with anything in Slack. I don't want to listen to any podcasts, but I still want to be maybe updated with like cool things that are happening within the community. And having some sort of like a monthly newsletter would be helpful in that sense, right? So I do think that if I had the technical chops, and maybe I will start to invest more time into this, that having something dedicated to this, directory of members that kind of amass over time would be very powerful in its own right, because then people can like filter for specific individuals and reach out and say like, it's just a single point of contact of like, hey, I'm a Cambridge member and saw your profile on the directory, right? I could imagine that if this was even a couple thousand people of very diverse backgrounds, that even having access to the directory alone could be valuable in its own right. So I will have a website for the community where people
like a
can
landing
like,
page.
can apply and all of that stuff. And I think it would be maybe like a dream to have like a dedicated app or a dedicated website that is like completely navigable by the member. But I want to first prove out like, could I even get 100 people that would be willing to pay like a low dollar amount of like $50 or $100 per year, just to be part of this, and see if that's sustainable by itself. Is at least how I've been thinking thugh this.
Amazing! I'm really excited.
Have you done anything in the community space at all, digital online communities, or mostly been a user of other?
I am definitely aware of a lot of Discord communities that are active, and those within the tech/solopreneur space. Twitter is obviously very active, but like for a closed community, it's almost always Discord, and those communities are formed again by they're launched by a single solopreneur like through their YouTube channel. But I'm not aware of like a more general not like decentralized solopreneur channel or Discord group that is out there.
Have you the Discord channels that you've been a part of? I'm less familiar with Discord.
Okay.
I know my younger brothers use it for like gaming and stuff like that. Do you find it more useful than other like chat ecosystems?
So this is my very personal experience. For all Slack groups that I'm part of, they just fizzle out in the like maybe like max 1 or 2 years, whereas Discord I've seen channels that have been active for many like 5-6 years.
Really?
And even like one of the companies that I work for as for my agency, they use Discord for all internal communication, and I find it more Slack feels more like it should be part of a corporate company, whereas Discord feels like you can express your free thoughts more. Because I don't know if it's the UI or if it's because of the community that's already been formed through Discord versus Slack, but that's the kind of I guess like chat culture I get. So when I see a group that's formed on Slack, I already have this like preconceived notion that it's very like it's gonna be like just the owner posting like once every month and nobody like just responding to it, whereas Discord you will always like expect an open communication always happening in some channels.
I see. Interesting.
And
in terms of like retrievability as well, of like following different threads, and is it pretty comparable to Slack, would you say? Because my perception is that like Discord is maybe a bit more ephemeral in that somebody posts something like quick, and then it kind of gets lost in the feed. Whereas maybe Slack is like there's a bit more staying power and searchability use, but I haven't used Discord before, so maybe that's not the case. Yeah,
and that's why I brought up maybe it's not the UI, because like from a design standpoint, like they're almost identical. Like searchability, retrievability, they're almost all this like it's equally easy. So I don't think it's the usability that's different, but more of a culture that's already formed and people's perspectives about it.
Cool. Okay, well maybe I'll have to.
What about you? Like all the Slack groups that you're part of, are there like any active Slack groups that?
The only Slack groups that I've actually been a part of are mostly related to work environments.
Okay, yeah.
So I personally have not. Actually, that's not true. So there is one Slack group. So there's a community called Next Chapter. That's kind of like a learning community, and it was based out of Sydney. So there's a lot of Australian like people represented there. And I think the challenge that I identified there was that, for the most part, people didn't know each other that well. And so there was an intimidation factor of like, what should I post and who are these other people? And like there was an interest channel where people would introduce themselves. And I found that to be cool, just to see new people coming on board. But there was still like, in terms of building interconnectivity, there was a challenge there. Yeah. Right. So that's the main issue that I had seen, and is something that is going to be tricky to solve for. But one of the hopes is like, and one of the cool use cases that I've seen with these communities is once the communities build enough of a membership base, some communities have this thing where you just like put your email in the inbox, and you can just say, here are the types of people that I want to have conversations with, and then there's an algorithm that will match you every like 2 weeks, and you just have a conversation, right? And I've done that with a few communities, and more often than not have like had pretty high percentage in terms of interesting conversations and just meeting people of different backgrounds. And so being able to do that within my own community, I think would be a valuable thing to hopefully like mitigate that issue of it's just like too many people posting about too many different things and I don't really know any of them.
Right. Yeah, it will be very interesting to look into like what makes Discord feel, at least to me, more approachable, whereas Slack feels more like standoffish. But yeah, that is something that like as long as you know like a lot of Slack groups that you've benefited from and that are active, I think it's definitely worth a try.
My ideal would be to do like a A/B test between the two, right? And like have them in parallel. But it seems like it's got to be I choose one or the other.
I feel like whatever platform you choose will actually like decide on how people perceive it. So it'll be fun to experiment with both. Yeah. But
all right. Well, this I know we're going to be coming up on time, but appreciate
thank you so much for having me. Yeah,
and you're one of the early people that I've met that have been like refreshing to speak with. Yeah, and so thank you for doing it.
And I'm really excited for both of our journeys in Korea to come. Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Thanks, Lucas.
All right. Thank you.